Human waiter, fired for helping elderly alien. Moments later, something incredible happened. The restaurant buzzed with the usual evening crowd as Danny Martinez wiped down table 7 for the 3rd time that hour, and his manager Greg had been watching him like a hawk ever since the new corporate policy came down last week. And the policy was clear, and employees were to maintain professional distance from all customers, especially the alien dignitaries who frequented the upscale establishment. In downtown Seattle, Danny had worked at Constellation Dining for 3 years, and he took pride in treating every customer with kindness, whether they were human or from the far reaches of the galaxy. But tonight something felt different. An elderly, Caltharian woman shuffled through the entrance, and her silvery skin glowed faintly under the restaurant lights, and her 3 eyes blinked slowly as she struggled with her walking apparatus, and the hostess barely glanced up from her podium. The alien woman stood there for several minutes, and her frail body swaying slightly, and nobody moved to help her, and Danny watched from across the room as other servers deliberately turned away, and their faces tight with the same corporate fear that had infected the whole staff. He could not stand it anymore. Danny set down his tray and walked straight to the elderly Caltharian. "And excuse me, Mom, and let me help you to your table," and he said softly, and offering his arm, her middle eye focused on him with surprise and gratitude. "And thank you, young human." And she whispered in accented English, and her voice like wind chimes, "And most do not see me anymore." He guided her slowly to a quiet corner booth and pulled out the chair and adjusted the gravity cushion to accommodate her physiology. "And would you like some time to look at the menu, or can I bring you some water?" and he asked. The woman smiled, and a gesture that looked almost human. "And water would be lovely," and she said, and her 3 eyes beginning to shimmer with moisture. Danny brought her a special mineral water from the Caltharian section of the bar, and something most servers did not even know existed, and he spent a few extra minutes explaining the menu and making sure she was comfortable before taking her order. That was when Greg appeared at his elbow, my office, and now in the manager hissed. Danny followed him to the back, and his stomach sinking because he already knew what was coming. What did I just see out there? And Greg demanded, and slamming the office door, "I was helping a customer," and Danny replied calmly, "You were violating policy." And Greg shot back, "And we discussed this, and no special treatment, and no extended interactions, and the aliens come here for privacy and not to be fawned over by the help. She needed assistance," and Danny said, and his voice rising slightly, "and she is an elderly woman who could barely walk." Greg held up his hand, "And I do not want to hear it. And corporate has been crystal clear. And we had complaints last month about staff being too familiar with off-world guests, and you just spent 10 minutes with that customer when you have 6 other tables waiting. She was not even seated yet." And Danny protested, "Exactly." And Greg said, and leaning back in his chair, "And that is the hostess job and not yours. And this is your 3rd violation this month. Danny and I have to let you go." The words hit him like a physical blow. "And you are firing me for helping an old woman. Sit down." "I am firing you for repeatedly ignoring company policy," and Greg said, but his eyes would not meet Danny's. "And clean out your locker. And I will have your final check ready in an hour." Danny stood there for a moment, and disbelief washing over him, and then he nodded and turned and walked out, and he collected his belongings from his locker, and his hands shaking with anger and frustration, and 3 years of good service gone because he committed the terrible crime of basic human decency. He took off his apron and folded it neatly and left it on the shelf, and then walked back through the restaurant to leave. And the Caltharian woman caught his eye as he passed, and concern etched across her alien features. Danny gave her a small wave and a sad smile, and then pushed through the front door into the cool Seattle evening. He sat on the curb outside, and his head in his hands, and trying to process what just happened, and how was he going to pay rent, and his student loans, and his mother's medical bills, and the weight of it all pressed down on his shoulders. A shadow fell across him. The elderly Caltharian woman stood there and leaning heavily on her walking apparatus, and young human, and she said gently, "And why do you sit here in sorrow?" Danny looked up and startled, "And Mom, you should be inside eating, and I am fine." "You are not fine," and she said, and sitting down beside him with a soft grunt, And I am very old, and I know pain when I see it, and tell me what happened he should not, and he knew he should not, but something about her kind eyes made the words spill out, and they fired me. And he said quietly, and for helping you, and I am sorry if I caused you any discomfort, and I just could not watch you struggle. The woman was quiet for a long moment, and her 3 eyes studying his face. And what is your name? And she asked finally, Danny, and Danny Martinez. I am called Kira. And she said, and Danny Martinez, I think you do not understand what you have done today. He laughed bitterly. And oh, I understand, and I lost my job, no. And Kira said, and her voice suddenly stronger, and you showed kindness to the mother of Ambassador Thel Kira, and the head of the Caltharian diplomatic mission to Earth, and you know how rare that is. Danny stared at her. And you are an ambassador's mother. I am many things, and Kira said, and a mother and a grandmother, and a former council leader of 7 star systems, and today, I came to your establishment specifically to see how humans treat those who seem powerless. And she paused, and most failed the test, and you did not. I do not understand. And Danny said, the Caltharian people are considering a major trade agreement with Earth. And Kira explained, and worth billions of your dollars. But we needed to know if humans possess true compassion or merely politeness toward those who can benefit them. And so I came here, dressed simply and moving slowly, and appearing vulnerable, and to see what would happen. And Danny began most ignored me, and she continued, and some looked annoyed, and your manager's hostess walked past me 3 times without acknowledgement, but you left your work and risked disapproval and gave genuine care to a stranger, and she reached out with her long silver fingers and placed them on his hand, and that is the character my people value above all else. Danny felt tears stinging his eyes, and I still lost my job. Perhaps, and Kira said, and her eyes twinkling, but you gained something far more valuable. And she pulled out a small communication device and tapped it with practiced ease, and Thel. And she said, when a face appeared on the screen, and I found him. The face on the screen belonged to a younger Caltharian, and his features sharp with intelligence, and mother, are you well, and did the test. It is complete, and Kira interrupted, and I found a human of true worth, and his name is Danny Martinez, and he sacrificed his livelihood to show kindness to an old woman, and she smiled at Danny. And I believe we have found our human liaison. The younger Caltharian's 3 eyes widened. And you are certain? I am certain, and Kira said firmly, and offer him the position. Danny looked between them in confusion. And what position, and what is happening? The Caltharian embassy is establishing a new cultural exchange program, and the face on the screen explained. And we need a human coordinator and someone who understands both species and who values compassion over profit, and the salary is 200,000 Earth dollars annually, and full benefits and housing near the embassy. And if you are interested, Danny could barely breathe. And 200,000, that is, you need not decide this moment, and Kira said gently, but know that your kindness today changed your trajectory. And she struggled to her feet, and Danny automatically reached out to steady her and see. And she said to her son, and even now he helps. And this is the 3 months. Later, Danny stood in the Caltharian embassy conference room and watching as Ambassador Thel Kira signed the historic trade agreement with Earth representatives, and Kira sat in the place of honor, and her 3 eyes bright with pride, and she caught Danny's gaze across the room and nodded. After the ceremony, she approached him, and you have done well, young Danny. And she said, and our cultural exchange program has 30 human students learning Caltharian science, and 50 Caltharian students studying Earth literature and all, because you could not walk past an old woman in need. I just did what felt right. And Danny said, exactly. And Kira replied, and that is why you were chosen. And she paused, and I heard something interesting today, and your former manager called the embassy, and he wished to apologize and to offer you your old job back, and at triple the salary. Danny laughed. And what did you tell him? I told him you were too busy changing the galaxy to wait tables. And Kira said, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, and though I did mention that he might consider changing his policies, and human kindness should never be punished, and it should be celebrated. That evening, Danny walked through downtown Seattle and past Constellation. Dining, and through the window he could see the staff now greeting every customer warmly, and alien and human alike. and Greg caught sight of him and raised a hand in acknowledgement and regret, clear on his face. Danny waved back and kept walking toward the embassy and toward his new life and toward a future built on the simple act of helping someone who needed it. Sometimes the smallest gestures of humanity rippled across the stars and created waves.